The following program is a special presentation of the Big Ten Network, produced in association with the University of Wisconsin.
Financial and military tensions between Washington and Beijing are heating up. Rapid economic growth is fueling increased Chinese assertiveness on the international stage. We'll take a look at China and the future of Sino-U.S. relations next, during Office Hours. I'm Ken Goldstein, professor of political science at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Today we're taking a look at Chinese politics and U.S. relations with Asia. Joining me is Ed Friedman. Ed is a political science professor at UW-Madison, has worked for the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Foreign Affairs, and served as an advisor to a United Nations project in China. His teaching and research interests include Chinese foreign policy, U.S. relations with Asia, and the international political economy. Ed, great to have my friend and colleague here joining us on Office Hours.
It's my pleasure, Ken.
So, not that I have to bring everything back to political advertising, but where most Americans are hearing about China now is in 30-second spots. Both Republicans and Democrats in political campaigns that are going on now are using China as the enemy, talking about China as a rising threat. Now, obviously, lots of hyperbole when it comes to campaign commercials, but take me through what's going on with China now. What are the fundamentals? Is China a rising threat?
China is a great power. It is already at worst the other superpower. It has values and interests which challenge the United States all around the world, and we better take them seriously. And if these commercials help people take it seriously, however one-sided or one-liners they are, they're probably a good thing.
So what are some of those values and interests that are different?
Well, the basic purpose of Chinese foreign policy is, of course, to entrench the ruling group in Beijing, which is an authoritarian single-party dictatorship. And so the essence of its foreign policy is to make the world safe for authoritarianism. That means that China is no friend of forces trying to make for improvements in democracy or human rights anywhere around the world. And since they see the United States as the major force that promotes democracy and human rights, they have no interest in the United States being a major force in the world. We are their enemy number one.
So I want to take us through a little bit later some of those flashpoints, but the United States and the world has gone through a great recession. How does China's economy stand now, China's society stand now? We're still struggling to get out of our great recession. Has the Chinese economic ship righted itself? Did they do it quicker than we did?
So they had a mammoth Keynesian stimulus package. Since their economy is 1/4 the size of ours, and their package was at least twice the size of ours, and since they don't have to worry about going through Congress to get things approved, they essentially had a package of stimulus 8 times our size on the streets in no time at all. And the result has been that growth has continued in China at an above 9% rate. The question that people ask about it is that much money that fast into the system, did it all go into productive things, or has it gone into stocks and property, and is it creating a bubble that's just going to burst a few years from now?
Talk to me more about that. So I was reading some articles in which there were some investors and some hedge fund people, and one particular gentleman who traveled to China and traveled around China taking pictures of himself in front of huge empty buildings. And he was making the argument that all of this money went into fuel this real estate bubble, and that there's going to be a big pop down the line.
Well, the government is very aware of that. Most Chinese do not believe that the bubble will burst. And this is a sign of a bubble. They believe the prices will only keep going up. And so people buy things that they can't afford under the assumption that the prices will catch up and eventually they'll be fine. The Chinese government is totally conscious of these dangers, and they are doing their best to try to cool down the market in various kinds of ways. They've just raised interest rates at home so that money doesn't move so fast. The problem is that the Chinese leadership today is not the leadership of Mao Zedong. And if you say, how many factions are there in China? There are as many factions as there are power holders. Each one thinks about their own interests. And any party person who's making money on the property market or the stock exchange pays no attention to the central directives. And so the center's had a very difficult time cooling off the market.
So a ton there to talk about. But let me jump on the comment you made about the different factions. So it's one party, the Communist Party, who's in charge, and obviously not Western-style democracy or American-style democracy. That doesn't mean that there's not politics internally in China. Different groups, different interests. Carve out some of those for us.
Well, it's inconceivable not to have politics, because as you were saying, people are different. They've come out of different historical experiences, different generations. They have different friends. They worked in different units. They have different visions of the world. So, of course, there's endless groups which are always competing in anybody's politics. In the early 1990s, after China had a great democracy movement, was bloodily crushed. This movement headquartered in Tiananmen Square, brutally crushed on June 4th, 1989, and then the Soviet Union fell apart and the Communist Party and Soviet Union lost power. Everybody in the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party was scared. It could happen to them. And so in that atmosphere, everybody subsumed their interests for the collective good. If we don't all hang together, we'll all hang separately kind of view. And so these differences didn't much matter, because the main thing was that they all survived. But today, China's a great success, and they're not worried. They're very proud of what they achieved. They see themselves as the rising power in the world. So these differences within the system are far more important today, because it's much harder, as with the story I just told you about the property prices, to get people on the same page anymore inside of China.
Let me interrupt you here. Let's take a quick break, and I want to come back and talk more about those different factions now in China. Please stay with us on Office Hours as we talk about rising China.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
Where others saw lumber, we recognized a treasure. Where others saw the night, we chose the stars. Where others saw pieces, we unlocked the puzzle that could mean the end of paralysis and cancer. Since 1848, thinkers and achievers at Wisconsin have fearlessly sought ideas that transform the world. Keep on, Wisconsin. Keep on.
Welcome back to Office Hours. I'm here with my colleague Ed Friedman from the Department of Political Science, and we're talking about China, Sino-U.S. relations, and a rising China on the global stage. So Ed, let me let you finish that thought. There are now different, is factions the correct term, within the Communist Party? Who would be the major ones, and what differentiates them?
It's a non-transparent system. They don't want us to see any differences. Everybody puts on a good face, and whatever the agreement is, everybody has to go along with it. So when you talk about factions or opinion groups or these differences, there's always a little bit speculative about it. One shouldn't be sure that one gets it true. But I think basically the two groups have to do with those people who are attached to the present president, who comes out of a national organization called the Communist Youth League, and who many people see as a more populist kind of person, harsh at home, disciplinarian, strong against foreign enemies that are out to get us. Now's the time for China to seize its opportunity in the world. And then a group which people often think of as the Shanghai group, Shanghai being the great open metropolis of China, people who are much more confident that time is on China's side. It's been playing a winning game, rising peacefully. It should keep playing that winning game. It shouldn't risk things by doing adventuresome kind of things, worrying that the regime might be too assertive, antagonizing people, and undermining its own basis for growth.
So when you say populist about the current president, there's certainly a nationalism in China when it comes to Taiwan, and you brought a picture here which was taken by cell phone of a Chinese demonstration. I think we can show it to our taken just this month.
About a week ago.
And I think we can show it to our viewers there. And could you tell us what that says in Chinese?
If I remember, it says, "Our most important business is wiping out Japan."
Okay. So Japan as the common enemy.
Of the day.
Of the day.
Yes.
And what are the political advantages to, so why is the Chinese government doing that? You use the term, hang together. One of the ways they can hang together is fueling nationalist sentiment against external enemies.
Absolutely. So there is a nationalist glue which definitely legitimates the regime. The regime gave us atomic bombs, nuclear missiles, China standing up in the world. No one's going to push us around anymore. The Japan thing is because the Japanese arrested a Chinese ship captain who rammed into two Japanese government ships in Japanese water. And obviously that was, from the Chinese point of view, a great crime, and Japan should apologize for it. And the Japanese refused to do so. So there was unleashed in China a great amount of anti-Japanese, and this is the reason I use the word populism, racism. It was, without a doubt, there's a racial element to it. Japanese are little, Japanese don't deserve their place in the sun, Chinese are the great people, Japanese should recognize they should be subordinated to the Chinese, how dare they act as if they're an independent nation with sovereign rights.
But the government also worries about things going too far. So I remember a couple years ago there were demonstrations against Japanese textbooks about World War II. And there seemed to be, organic demonstrations by the Chinese people. A Japanese department store was attacked in Beijing, I believe. But then the Chinese government got concerned that these demonstrations were going too far. So they sort of tried to turn the spigot on and turn the spigot off on these sorts of things as well.
Well, it's not clear how much of it is under control. You really have these different opinion groups which would respond differently to it. So these demonstrations, of which this picture is just one, only occurred in inland cities. No demonstrations occurred in the major coastal metropolises, which are the big places engaged in international trade.
Not marching down the street in downtown Shanghai.
Absolutely not. Nothing in Shanghai or Beijing or Canton or any of those kinds of places. And many people think that the Chinese government was trying to say to the Japanese government just what you said. Yeah, we don't want to mess up technology exchange or your investments or our trading with you, but we're not going to take it.
Interesting. I want to come back and discuss that little good guy, bad guy, and you may orchestrate it to do some negotiating. There's also a danger of that getting out of control. So let's talk about that. When we come back next, please stay with us on Office Hours.
Great People is our campaign for need-based scholarship aid. It's the key to the long-term well-being of the university as a whole.
In 1970, tuition cost about $500.
Today, it's about $9,000.
We don't want UW-Madison to be a university that is deemed to be out of reach.
The Great People Scholarship gives students a chance to succeed in life.
Support the Great People Scholarship. Visit uwgreatpeople.org.
Welcome back to Office Hours. We're here with my colleague Ed Friedman talking about China on the world stage. Ed, let's finish up that conversation we were having about the anti-Japanese demonstrations. So on the one hand, that was a useful tool for the Chinese government to say to the Japanese, playing a little good guy, bad guy, look, we've got these serious demonstrations going on. We don't want to screw things up, but things could get seriously out of control if you don't let this captain go and if you don't do X, Y, and Z. The government, that's a dangerous game, or they're pretty confident that they can keep a lid on it?
I think they are, for the most part, confident they can put a lid on it because they have time and time again. On the other hand, as you suggest, not only can it grow out of control, but in the example you just gave about the recent anti-Japan demonstrations, and so they do put a lid on it because they do want to continue the economic relationship. Well, that means that the passionate populace who hate Japan as a racial kind of thing feel that the government has sold them out. And so there really is growing anger in the society that the government is too soft. And so you can feel in the society a revving up of these chauvinist kind of sentiments, which could be very, very dangerous in the long run. Absolutely.
Let's turn to another topic where there's nationalist sentiment, which is Taiwan. So first of all, I think it would be useful for our viewers to hear from you. What's the issue there?
Okay. Well, Taiwan is an island. It's north of the Philippine Islands. It's south of the Japanese Okinawa chain of islands. It's about 100 miles off the coast of a Chinese province. and it is claimed by the People's Republic of China, the government in Beijing, as a province of China. But it actually it's an independent government, has its own government, it's democratic, raucous democracy, has its own elections, its own military, runs its own foreign policy, and China claims that it must return, as it says, return to the People's Republic of China. The view on Taiwan is different. The view on Taiwan is basically Taiwan is already an independent state. It doesn't have to declare independence. Everybody knows it is independent. We would like to have peaceful, mutually beneficial economic relations with China. And if things go well, someday we can talk about some kind of political association that we can all live with. And the question really is, can the government in Beijing live with that kind of a compromise? Because it looks like they talk a language of we will settle for nothing but everything. You must be as much a part of China as is Hong Kong.
So we talked about the fervor of the people sometimes putting the government in a box. And I think it sometimes surprises Americans that the feelings on Taiwan are not just leadership feelings. There actually are, and as much as we might say Taiwan's a democracy and we're defending a democracy and don't understand the Chinese position, there is organic and widespread belief among the Chinese people about Taiwan and Taiwan's connection to the mainland, to China.
Right. I don't know if it's organic, and I don't know if it's historically justified, because we could have a serious conversation about Taiwan history. Taiwan was never, for a day, until the end of World War II, ruled by Chinese on the mainland of China. So it's actually a historically interesting question.
So maybe, and also maybe worth it, so the Chiang Kai-shek loses the Civil War to Mao, he takes his nationalist armies and elites, and they move to Taiwan, where there was an indigenous people.
It had been a Japanese colony for 50 years, and the Allies have given Chiang Kai-shek the duty to disarm the Japanese and take over and occupy Taiwan. And then, as you say, he loses a civil war against Mao's forces, and his party stays on Taiwan, is what occurs. But right now, relations are pretty good. A lot of economic exchange. You can go fly. It's easier to fly from Shanghai to the capital of Taiwan than to fly from Shanghai to Beijing. And the present government takes credit for bringing peace in the region, and I like to see peace in the region. And the problem always is, what's the next step? What happens if the Chinese will expect the next step is going to be political annexation? And Taiwanese do not expect the next step is political annexation.
So as this theater, the United States sells close to $7 billion in weapons systems to Taiwan. The Chinese have this reaction. But actually, as you suggest, the ties between Taiwan and China and the economic ties are pretty strong. Or is this really a serious flashpoint that when you think about where World War III could start, it's in the Taiwan Straits?
Personally, I don't see it as a flashpoint for World War III, but it's serious in this sense. Taiwan survives because China has to worry that if they attacked it, the U.S. might intervene. And you can't get the American Congress to agree to that unless Taiwanese show that they are willing to defend themselves. And so if Taiwanese don't do something, buying the weapons and maintaining a defensive posture, you will not be able to persuade the members of the American Congress that they should support a people that is not willing to defend itself. So even though I don't think the weapons are decisive in any way, as you suggest, they are very important in maintaining the politics that allows this status quo, this peaceful status quo where Taiwan is an autonomous democracy, to continue.
When we come back, I want to continue our discussion about Sino and U.S. militaries and possible conflicts there. So please stay with us on Office Hours.
This program is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. If you have comments about this broadcast, please email them to programming@uc.wisc.edu.
Welcome back to Office Hours. We're here with Ed Friedman from the Department of Political Science, a China expert, and we're talking about China on the world stage. Ed, let's look at other possible areas of military conflict. It's not just Taiwan, where the Chinese military and Chinese leadership are beginning to flex their muscles. There's other things they're doing in other areas where they're flexing their muscles?
Absolutely. So within Chinese nationalism, it's what we call a victim vengeance nationalism. The view is they have been the victim of history, and they are putting right their history. And they have a large view of all the places that have supposedly been stolen from them. So their view is that the whole South Sea, this is essentially the major Southeast Asian Sea, it's all Chinese. And the East Sea, which is essentially where Japan is all Chinese. And their goal is essentially to build a navy big enough to take all of that. And that is what they are gradually doing. So there have been increasing clashes of Chinese ships with Japanese ships, with American ships in the South Sea, with Vietnamese ships, Philippines ships, and so on. And beyond that, the Chinese view would be, who gave America the right to be the world superpower? We have every right to be at least as strong as the United States. We're not going to depend on the United States protecting our oil coming from the Middle East. We're going to build our own navy. And we're going to send it out to those regions also. We're going to have a great blue water navy because there's no reason why China isn't as good as anybody.
And so that term blue water navy means a navy that goes beyond your coastal shores.
It's going way beyond their coastal shores.
Now, obviously, the American Pacific Fleet is a major player there. Aircraft carriers, submarines. Is there a danger there of something happening? You talked about a Chinese fishing trawler running into some Japanese ships, and that was a major drama. A scary thing is a United States aircraft carrier and a Chinese warship in the dance that they sometimes do of shadowing each other of something happening.
Right. These are all great dangers, especially since there really isn't good military-to-military talks to try to work out scenarios that things don't grow out of control. The Chinese, whenever they're angry at the United States for whatever, always break off military-to-military talks. We're in one of those moments right now. And so it's really easy to imagine things getting out of control. They've been purchasing and building ground-to-ship missiles so that they can hit American aircraft carriers, or say American aircraft carriers come to the aid of a Taiwan or a Vietnam or Japan if they were in trouble with China. And so there really are just too many scenarios which could grow out of control. And I would assume and hope that we all have an interest in peace and in better relations. But it would be very naive not to see all the dangers that are sitting out there. The rise of China is a world changer, and they really do see the United States as their major rival in the world.
Thoughts to end on? Thanks for joining us on Office Hours. I hope you'll come back again.
It's my pleasure. I wish I had a happy ending, but in rivalries between a rising superpower and a present superpower, political science tells you the worst dangers sit out there.
And we'll watch that. Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget, Office Hours is on the web via our university website, Facebook, or even Twitter. Take a look and let us know your thoughts. From the University of Wisconsin-Madison, this has been Office Hours. Thanks for stopping by.
The preceding program was produced by the University of Wisconsin in association with the Big Ten Network.